All right, let's get into it. We're about to dive into the story of modern macroeconomics. And trust me, this isn't some quiet, orderly science. It's more like an intellectual battlefield, a story full of conflict, crisis, and 100 years of really intense debate.
You know, this quote from the economist Knut Wicksell just hits the nail on the head. He wrote it a long time ago, but it perfectly captures what we're talking about. See, unlike a lot of other sciences where everyone kind of builds on what came before, macroeconomics is just different. It's defined by these deep, passionate disagreements that never seem to go away.
And this right here really shows you what I mean. When it comes to microeconomics, how a single company sets its prices or how one specific market works, economists mostly get along. But when you zoom out to macroeconomics, oh, that's where the fireworks are. We're talking about the big stuff, the health of entire nations, inflation, unemployment, growth. It's a total battleground of ideas.
At its heart, this whole conflict really boils down to two major camps, wrestling with one massive question. What is the government's proper role in the economy? On one side, you have the classical tradition, which basically says, hey, trust the markets, they'll sort themselves out. And on the other side, you've got the Keynesian tradition, which argues, no way, markets can fail spectacularly, and sometimes they need help.
So, how did this intellectual war really get started? Well, the story of modern macroeconomics truly begins with a crisis, a disaster, really, that just completely shattered the old way of thinking and forced everybody back to the drawing board.
The Great Depression. This wasn't just a small recession, it was an absolute global catastrophe. We're talking about a whole decade of suffering, with millions upon millions of people out of work. And the biggest problem? The economic theories of the day, the classical ideas, had absolutely no answer for it. They were stumped.
You see, the classical view was that the economy was this beautiful, self-correcting machine. If people lost their jobs, wages would just naturally fall, companies would hire them back, and everything would return to normal pretty quickly. So in their view, government shouldn't meddle. In fact, meddling would probably just gum up the works and make things worse.
But then, into this crisis steps this brilliant and frankly revolutionary British economist, John Maynard Keynes. He looked around at the chaos and basically said, you guys are all wrong. This machine is broken. He argued the economy was not self-correcting and that it could get stuck in a terrible rut for a very long time.
And here was his big, game-changing idea. Keynes completely flipped the old logic on its head. He said the problem wasn't a lack of supply, the problem was that nobody was spending any money. He called this aggregate demand. Think of it like the engine of the economy. If people and businesses stop spending, the engine stalls, and the whole system grinds to a halt in a vicious cycle.
But Keynes didn't just point out the problem, he offered a solution. He came up with this powerful concept called the multiplier effect. The logic is actually pretty simple. If the government spends money, say building a bridge, that money goes into the pockets of workers. What do those workers do? They spend it, and that creates income for shopkeepers, who then spend it, and so on and so on. It creates a ripple effect.
And this little formula right here, it's the mathematical heart of that idea. It shows how an initial injection of spending, that's the delta I, gets magnified, creating a much bigger impact on the national income, the delta Y. This was huge. For the first time, there was a real, solid theory for why government action could be a good thing.
And boy, did his ideas catch on. Keynes sparked a revolution that led to this incredible period of stability and growth, an era that people now call the golden age of capitalism.
For about 25 years after World War II, governments were squarely in the driver's seat. They actively used government spending and taxes to manage their economies, trying to fine-tune things to hit these three big goals all at once.
And the confidence was just off the charts. I mean, listen to this quote. Policymakers really believed they had finally figured it out, that they had tamed the wild beast of the business cycle. It felt like permanent prosperity was just around the corner.
But you know how these stories go. Right when the confidence was at its absolute peak, this whole consensus was about to get hit by something it just could not explain. The intellectual war was about to heat up all over again. In the 1970s, the world got slammed by this bizarre, toxic combination that got nicknamed stagflation. You had a stagnant economy with high unemployment happening at the exact same time as runaway inflation. Now, this was a complete nightmare for Keynesian theory, because it said these two things were supposed to be opposites. It was like trying to drive by hitting the gas and the brake at the same time. It just didn't make sense.
This crisis blew the door wide open for a powerful counterattack, led by the incredibly persuasive economist Milton Friedman. And he had a totally different story to tell about what was wrong with the economy.
Friedman and his followers, the monetarists, basically said the Keynesians were looking in the completely wrong place. The problem wasn't spending, the problem was money itself. As Friedman famously put it, inflation is caused by one thing and one thing only: too much money being printed by central banks.
And this is the core of his theory. Friedman argued that the amount of money people want to hold is actually pretty stable and predictable. So, he reasoned, if the demand for money is stable, then the secret to a stable economy is just to control the supply of money. Keep it growing at a steady, predictable rate and you'll be fine. It was a simple, powerful idea that was a direct shot at the Keynesian way of thinking.
So the battle lines were completely redrawn. You had Team Keynes, who said government should be active pilots, constantly steering the economy. And then you had Team Friedman, who said no way, politicians can't be trusted. Just give us a simple, predictable rule for money and leave it alone.
So who won? Well, it's not that simple. The collapse of that old Keynesian consensus didn't lead to a new king. Instead, the whole field just kind of exploded into a bunch of different, competing ideas.
Yeah, the intellectual battlefield got a lot more crowded. You had the new classicals, who took Friedman's ideas even further. You had real business cycle theorists, who claimed downturns were just caused by shocks to technology. And you had the new Keynesians, who were busy trying to rebuild Keynes's original ideas on stronger foundations. The war of ideas suddenly had a whole lot of new fronts.
But while all these debates about short-term fixes were raging, some researchers started to focus on the biggest question of all: long-run economic growth. And the stakes here are just massive. Look at this. Over 100 years, the difference between an economy growing at 1.75% versus just 0.75%, well, it's the difference between an average income of over $18,000 and just over $5,000. It's literally the difference between being a rich country and a poor one. And this new focus on growth has created a bit of a new consensus. It turns out that the real secret sauce for long-term prosperity isn't just about tweaking policy knobs in the short term. It's about the deep stuff: having secure property rights, good rule of law, a culture of innovation, and, of course, a well-educated population.
And so that brings us right back to where we started, with that same huge fundamental question that has driven this whole story. After a century of debate, after world wars, a Great Depression, a Golden Age, and countless revolutions in thought, the argument rages on. The state of war, just as Wicksell said, continues. And figuring out how to finally achieve lasting prosperity, well, that's still the biggest, most important challenge in all of modern macroeconomics.